Oi, oi, it's your boy. The MMA heavyweight making boxing look not so great, Jack Slack. It's the Jack Slack podcast, and we're coming at you on Wednesday, the 1st of November, a very rainy Wednesday here in the UK. And if you're wondering why the podcast is late, it's because I spent the first part of the week writing my Killing the King, or rather, How Francis Ngannou Killed the King. A title that rightfully made some people very angry. Be like, killed the king? Lost the split decision, mate. And you're like, well, split decision, boxing. Most boxing bad decisions, they managed to get all three judges on side at least. Now, I think we can do some Ngannou versus Fury stuff. It's a bit late in the week for me to be dropping this on a podcast and expecting people to tune in for it, but we can talk about it a little bit. If you haven't read the article, go read the article. It's free. It's available for everyone. I was like, why not? Let's just put this out there. So it's 3,000 words. It's a lot of, 16, 17 diagrams, GIFs and things. And an audio track. So if you don't like reading, you can always just scroll along while I read it to you. Erotically. But yeah, man, what an event. Not an event. I don't give a shit about the event aspect of it. I don't care if your ring's popping up out of the floor or you got the fan man falling. Actually, I do care if you got the fan man falling in the ring. If you don't know what that's a reference to, that's Riddick Bowe versus Evander Holyfield 2? ? One of their fights, the fan man flew into the ring and people thought that he was attacking the fighters or something. So it just descended into a brawl and a load of people kicked the shit out of the fan man. But yeah, Saudi Arabia put a load of money into this, made it into a massive spectacle, because that was the whole point of it. This is one of the interesting things when people say oh, Francis Ngannou's never going to draw any buyers, blah, blah, blah. There are people out there, there are countries out there, there are regimes out there that don't give a shit about the buy rate. Saudi Arabia and the UAE put on fights to make people aware of Saudi Arabia and the UAE. The Saudis were probably not expecting to break even on this. Which is, links back to sports washing and even the Rumble in the Jungle, my favourite piece of sports washing in the world. But yeah, I've heard people say they can only afford to pay Francis 10 million because of the Saudis. And then you're like, but the Saudis are paying for fight nights from the UFC now. And the UAE's been paying for fight nights for years. The UAE, Abu Dhabi rather, let the UFC have an island and a hotel to run events out of. There is money there. It's not the UAE or Saudi Arabia keeping the fighters poor. If Dana White or someone who's not Dana White and is actually in charge of this stuff, but we use Dana White as a figurehead, said to them, there's 24 fighters on the card. I need $12 million to pay each of them $500,000. Whoever's in charge of organising the event on the Saudi side would be like, why are you telling me this? I knew a dude who worked in hospitality for a major football club in the UK, and he was told, ask about anything over £500,000. And then he had something and he brought it to whoever was in charge and said, this is over £500,000. And the guy said, well, put it through as 2 invoices then. There are things in sports. There are people in sports who do not give a shit about breaking even, and they will happily pay as much as you want for this stuff. So the idea that the UFC can't pay these stupid fees to their fighters when the UAE and Saudi Arabia desperately want these fights is daft. But all the spectacle and the money and stuff aside, Francis Ngannou came out and he put on a blinder. He fucking boxed with Tyson Fury, and he did great. He lost a split decision, but a lot of people, I've seen a lot of people's cards. One of the most egregious was one of the guys who gave it for Fury, 96, 93 or whatever it was. But a lot of people just there's a lot of rounds that could have gone either way. There's a round where Ngannou drops Fury, but there were very few decisive Fury moments, which is crazy. Now, there's two ends to this. I believe that Francis Ngannou did a lot of good stuff. I was surprised by his commitment to boxing. I thought he'd gas out throwing punches because he does in MMA. And he did look tired by the end of it, but he was still throwing punches the whole time. And it was he who was being more deliberate and thoughtful, whereas Tyson Fury was trying to do his right hand and clinch stuff. If you watch the Deontay Wilder fights, if you watch the Dillian Whyte fight, Tyson Fury benefits enormously from this asymmetry of knowledge regarding the clinch. It's the same with Floyd Mayweather. It's the same with a lot of defensive geniuses. There are very few people like Pernell Whitaker who will stand and slip 8-9 punches in a row, because it's easier to slip one punch and clinch, or slip one punch, throw a massive counter and clinch. If you watch Tyson Fury versus Deontay Wilder 2 or 3, every single time he throws his right hand, he clinches immediately afterwards, because that makes sure that Wilder's not coming back at him. That means he can lean on him and kill some time. Every time Wilder ducks, he leans on the back of his head. Every time he ducks in on Wilder, he comes up to the clinch and Wilder doesn't lean on the back of his head. It's There are dudes in boxing who know how to clinch and how to stop the clinch, and there are dudes who just don't know anything. There's no like one guy who can stop the clinch but doesn't do the clinch. There's no one guy who does the clinch but can't stop the clinch. Literally, there are a few guys who know everything about it, and there are lots of guys who know nothing about it. And like, there's no more obvious example than like Manny Pacquiao, 8-division world champion, one of the greatest boxers of all time, didn't know how to deal with the fucking clinch. Didn't know how to stop a clinch. Didn't know how to break a clinch. Everyone got really mad during the Manny Pacquiao-Mayweather fight because Mayweather would just tie him up whenever Pacquiao got going. That's Pacquiao's fault. You saw in this fight that when someone who understands the clinch, albeit from a wrestling MMA perspective, Francis Ngannou, faces someone who likes to abuse the clinch in a boxing context, Tyson Fury had a hell of a time with this. And it was Tyson Fury who was resorting to the holding and hitting and stuff. I mean, Ngannou got away with a couple of uppercuts while sort of with the collar tie, but he was using it to push away. It was Fury who was entering the clinch. But if you watch the Fury-Wilder fights, he's constantly like leaning him into the clinch, and then when Wilder stops fighting against the clinch, when Wilder's just accepting the clinches, he pops his head up and hits him in the chin. You know, it's his infighting was there in the Wilder fights because he felt comfortable smothering Wilder, and then he'd break free when Wilder wasn't really paying attention. This fight, he couldn't smother him at all, so he couldn't work on the inside at all. The whole thing is like you pop off a couple of punches and then you clinch up and then you break free and pop off a couple of punches. He couldn't do any of that because he couldn't smother Ngannou at any point. So he's reduced to fighting on the outside. His jab wasn't working for him most of the time, even though Francis was really reaching for it very obviously. So he's throwing like a slappy left hook to right straight, and that was all he did. The best boxer in the world, the guy who's supposed to be able to do everything, threw like 17 body punches and all of them were jabs. It was Francis Ngannou who was throwing the right hands to the body and the odd left hook. Now, I think this all happened because Tyson Fury didn't... This is the thing. I think Tyson Fury trained for a fight. I don't think Tyson Fury knew anything much about Ngannou. And I think he thought this would be a walk in the park. I think this fight only happens because we currently have a heavyweight champion who would rather do 2 or 3 stupid cash grab easy fights and then one important fight every 3 or 4 years. That's always been the Tyson Fury way. He loves to tune up. You know, the Otto Whalens of the world, whoever the guy was who was before that, who was even worse. You know, he loves that stuff. All the talk about this happening again, it cannot happen again because Francis Ngannou, I mean, he's got a reality distortion field around him. He's the first time the UFC have managed to get to the end of a champion's contract without re-signing him and without managing to get him to lose first. You know, if they think you're not going to re-sign with them, they give you the hardest matchups possible and they make it really difficult for you. But he was already a champion. He was already fighting the best in the world and he'd already beaten the best in the world. And then he did Garn with one knee. So crazy. That's never happening again. You know, if Sean O'Malley was on the end of his contract and he wanted to fight Gervonta Davis and Gervonta Davis wanted to do that sort of freak show stuff, the UFC would promptly sign O'Malley's next fight against like Merab Dvalishvili and kill all the hype. So I called it an aligning of the stars because you had to have someone wanting to do this for an enormous amount of money. You had to have Tyson Fury wanting an easy fight for an enormous amount of money. You had to have Francis Ngannou at the end of his contract without losing the UFC heavyweight title. Because do you think they'd give a shit if he just lost the UFC heavyweight title and it was like UFC heavyweight, Francis Ngannou, not best heavyweight in MMA, Francis Ngannou? So I don't think you're ever seeing anything like this happening again. But, well, actually, I'll never say ever in combat sports, but it's not going to happen for a while. I do think that Francis Ngannou benefited a lot from who he was expected to be and being surprisingly much better at boxing than people thought he would be. And also Tyson Fury relying on the clinch so much. I think Tyson Fury, maybe with better preparation, gives him a harder time. I think there's a lot of heavyweights out there who would give him a very hard time. This is the thing about like fighting generally. It is an advantage to come in at the championship level. Yes, you're dealing with like, well, I mean, you didn't even have to do the extra 2 rounds because the fight, you know, the title wasn't on the line. But yeah, you're coming into the fight with the supposed best fighter in the world, but you haven't had to show consistency against all those other guys first. It's kind of like when guys go up a division to challenge for the title in MMA. I think Volkanovski, I think a lot of people think of him as like this, or were thinking of him as the second best lightweight in the world as well as the best featherweight. I think that if he'd had to fight his way to the lightweight title, he'd have probably lost along the way. I mentioned Andy Ruiz as a great example of someone who's just like really hard head, great work rate, very, very fast. I think he'd be a very difficult fight for Francis Ngannou. I mean, they're going to probably, if you're Anthony Joshua, you're looking at that and going, yeah, I want it. Deontay Wilder's an interesting one because in my head, they're both just massive punchers, and that's what they do and stuff. And that's what everyone else thinks because they just want to see two massive punchers smashed together. Deontay Wilder has weighed in for fights at like 220. Francis Ngannou weighed in for this fight at 277. That's insane. I mean, I think Big George Foreman was like 250. He was like 260 when he came back old and fat. This is a mammoth man we're talking about. Also, an absolutely jacked man. And people have been like, well, he's taken all kinds of steroids. It's like, yeah, test him then. I mean, he was passing USADA, but I'm sure he is because it's a professional sport. But he's got he's done his homework. He's doing well. Not like these things aren't all available to Tyson Fury, who's making millions and millions of dollars a fight. If Francis Ngannou's been doing it on $600,000 per fight, I mean, that's the most he earned. Good for him. So anyway, I think there's some guys who can swoop in and beat him. That's about it for that fight. Go read the article where it's all about the technical stuff. Let's talk about these fights coming up this weekend. We got one. Actually, no, I was just going to say only got one event on, and that's the UFC. We got a one championship event on, as well as the UFC. We got 2 1 events. The usual Friday night fights, which is just some Thais doing Thai boxing, which is always good fun, but I don't know a lot about them beforehand. But we got one championship doing Haggerty versus Fabricio Andrade, which is a really interesting fight. And then we got the UFC doing Jailton Almeida versus Derrick Lewis. I'm going to have a good moan about that because Jailton Almeida, I like him, but I also don't like him. It's an odd one. But out of deference to my boy, Jonathan Haggerty, and my other boy, Fabricio Andrade, let's briefly talk about that. Fabricio Andrade is the bantamweight MMA champ in one championship, and Jonathan Haggerty is the bantamweight 4-ounce Muay Thai champion in one championship. Fabricio Andrade was originally a kickboxer. Jonathan Haggerty was originally a kickboxer. And remember that we're talking about one championship. So bantamweight is 145, but that is with hydration testing. This is always the thing that trips people up because they go, well, no, Demetrius Johnson's actually fighting Adriano Moraes at 135, so he's technically a bantamweight and not a flyweight. And you're like, yeah, but they moved the limit up for everyone. He previously made 125 when they allowed weight cutting, and now they're supposed to be reducing the weight cutting through hydration testing. So both these guys would be 135 if they were fighting in not one. However, the intrigue of it is that Fabricio Andrade is the MMA champion, but he gets by on his striking. If you haven't watched his fights with John Lineker, they're astounding. He's just brilliant. And John Lineker's got an iron head and just keeps going forward, so they're fantastic fights, even though the first one ends by dick strike. But he's on a great little run in MMA. Jonathan Haggerty had a couple of great fights. Well, no, he had one great fight with Rod Tang, and then one fight where he got blown out quite quickly by Rod Tang. And then he went up to fight Ngannou at featherweight. Okay, sorry. He is actually doing featherweight with Ngannou. This is the one thing. It can never be straightforward. So Jonathan Haggerty went up to featherweight to fight Ngannou, knocked him out very quickly, to the surprise of almost everyone, and the amount of cope was remarkable. Jonathan Haggerty is a good kickboxer. He's a very good... I don't think I see him to compete too much like full traditional rules Muay Thai, but he's got lovely kicks. He's got a lovely teep, which is very rare in like proper kickboxing or like normal kickboxing. That's more of a Muay Thai thing. And even Rod Tang was surprised by that. But he's never been big for knocking people out with his hands, so it was proper weird to see him just chin Ngannou. But he's mainly like teeps and elbows. And a beautiful switch kick off his lead leg, which are all like really Muay Thai weapons. So the guy is like really heavily inspired by Muay Thai. He wants to be a Muay Thai guy. And the Muay Thai people, as in the fans, just fucking hate him for it. They're like, no, lose out of respect. It's not real Muay Thai if it's 4 ounces. There's a few weirdos who think that sort of stuff. But like, Nongau's been doing amazingly in 4 ounces. Everything that is useful in big gloves is useful in small gloves. One of my main criticisms of fucking boxing and kickboxing is that like guys just hide behind the big pillows that they have on their hands when you should be hiding behind your elbows, your arms, your frames, your shoulders, your back. All this stuff exists in 4 ounces. And if you see someone who's really good with 4 ounce gloves defensively, it's all that stuff. There's no fucking hands on your chin hiding behind it like Robin van Roosmalen. But anyway, the way that one works, you would think this would be the 4 ounce Muay Thai fight for the 4 ounce Muay Thai title at Jonathan Haggerty's featherweight. No, Jonathan Haggerty's coming back down to bantamweight to do the bantamweight kickboxing world title. One has done like 20 kickboxing fights this year. They have never given a shit about kickboxing, or they've given up giving a shit about kickboxing because everyone prefers 4 ounce Muay Thai. They keep the MMA stuff on the card and the grappling stuff on the card to make highlights and pretend that they're an MMA organization. But now they're back on kickboxing. So Fabricio Andrade, who hasn't kickboxed in years, is going to kickbox Jonathan Haggerty, who has been in 4-ounce gloves for years. They've put a title on it because it has to have a title on it, because why not? It's so weird. I mean, it's a really good fight. I just much prefer to see it in 4-ounce gloves, because you've got one of the best 4-ounce strikers in the world in 4-ounce Muay Thai, which is still a very small sport. You've got one of the best 4-ounce strikers in the world in MMA. So just do 4 ounces. But then you wouldn't be able to put a third belt on it. Whoever wins in this one, they're a double champ and the other guy's a single champ. No one loses their belt. It's great. But it should be great fun. I'm really looking forward to it. I've written a load of stuff about Jonathan Haggerty before. I haven't written anything about Fabricio Andrade. I keep meaning to. Sorry, Fabricio de Andrade, technically. Great jab, great knees. If you saw him against John Lineker, he was just ruthless with his height advantage, because people don't do it properly against John Lineker. He's teeping him, he's throwing high kicks, he's bringing knees up in the middle every time John Lineker steps in to throw the right hook to the body. Just looked like an assassin against John Lineker. So that will be a great fight, hopefully. Highly recommend watching it. The co-main event is a grappling match for the one welterweight championship. See, no, it says bantamweight kickboxing championship on the poster, so okay, this is just Tapology Cordic 145 featherweight. Anyway, this is the grappling championship at welterweight. Tyro Utolo versus Magomed Abdul Kadirov. This is funny because Abdul Kadirov actually has grappled in proper grappling competitions before. He was in ADCC 2015, having got through the trials in Russia or Asia or wherever. The Asian trials, sorry. And his claim to fame is that he almost took Rafael Lovato's back before losing in the first round of the competition in 2015. So 10 years ago. They're getting, they're trying to make him look a little bit more legit, because Tyro Utolo and Kedro Utolo had that great match with Tommy Langaker, but obviously no leg break, nothing you can put on social media. Mikey Musumeci just fights nobodies all the time. And they keep having to tease him going to MMA. Mikey Musumeci's never going to MMA. He looks like he'd cry if you slapped him. I've literally never seen him attempt a takedown. I've watched a load of his gi matches. I've seen all of his no-gi performances. I don't think I've ever seen him attempt a takedown. He's not going to MMA. It's just like the Gordon Ryan thing. He's just saying it. But yeah, if you put the best grapplers in the world in with people who aren't that good, you get nasty leg breaks and shit. Particularly if you put them in with sambists, because they don't really know about heel hooks, and then they refuse to tap to heel hooks. So there's that guy that Mikey tore the leg off. Tyro Utolo's last one was hilarious because they brought in a guy called Arslanliev, who lost to Nastyukhin in MMA in 2021, took 2 years off because they just couldn't get him a fight. And then they were like, will you grapple Tyro Utolo? And he grapples him, loses, but Brazilian taps. He does a tap and Tyro Utolo lets go. And then he tries to continue it and Tyro Utolo just smashes him again. It's so funny. It's one of the funniest clips of the year. Go check it out. So that's about it for the one card. I'm just saying there's some fun stuff on it. And then finally, obviously, the highlight of this weekend, probably for most people, is the UFC. Not a bad card. I mean, they are going... This is the thing. They tend to be better when they're on the road. They're off to Sao Paulo. They actually have to sell out in a stadium. But you've still got a Nicholas Dalby co-main event. I like Dalby. He's cool to me on Twitter, but actually he's on a 3-fight winning streak, so he's not doing too badly lately. But he's not sort of star power. I mean, obviously, Gabriel Bonfim is supposed to be the star power side of that fight. I imagine they want him to win. They got Rodrigo Nascimento versus Dontel Mays. Dontel Mays is terrible. But the main event, obviously, is Jailton Almeida versus Derrick Lewis. Speaking of terrible heavyweights, this is an intriguing one. I thought the original matchup was... this is the thing. I think a lot of people feel like they got a worse matchup out of this. Or maybe, actually, I've seen some people try and claim that they got a better match out of this, because Curtis Blades is obviously very hit and miss and not as fun. But... Jailton Almeida, this is the thing. I saw him on the Contender Series, and this was when I was trying to do the Contender Series every week for the podcast or for the Boycast. And I think I've said it before, but the first week I got Jack Della Maddalena and Jailton Almeida. I think were on the same card, or one of them was on the same card with someone else who's turned out to be good. But I was like, two very clearly very talented fighters on one card, and sometimes you can't tell how good someone's going to be. But there are times when you go yeah, that guy's got skills. He's going to be something. I had that with both Jailton Almeida and Jack Della Maddalena. And then every other week since then, it's just been shite. Yeah, it's so weird that you can get a legitimate, holy shit, that's some talent, come through this show, getting paid 3 and 3 or whatever it is on the show, and then 10 and 10 if they get the contract. And you could also have just the worst fighters you've ever seen somehow getting into the Contender Series. But Jailton Almeida, I was impressed by him because of his top game. His grappling is smothering, but there's sort of certainly in MMA, there's definitely a difference between very strong transitional grappling and very strong top control. Guard passes in MMA, effective guard passes, very few. There are a lot of guys who hold top half guard very well. They'll hit you a bit from close guard, and when you open your legs, they'll try and step over and stay in the half guard. But there aren't too many guys who pass guard really well. Jailton Almeida passes guard really well for a massive dude. And he actually gets to dominant positions. And it's an interesting thing because dominant positions, in the classical sense, don't exist so much anymore. You know, most of the dominant positions in modern grappling, from grappling heavy fighters, are things along the fence. They're sitting on the ankles, they're getting the back as the guy tries to scramble up. It's all these in-betweeny positions that are like slowing down the wall walk. Very few guys are really doing great stuff from side control or mount. I was going to say knee on belly, but you will never see anyone do anything effective from knee on belly. Well, occasionally. Very, very occasionally. But yeah, people want half guard from the top, then if they do pass, they get side control briefly, and then they lose it. Glover Teixeira was really the standout for old school. Force the half guard, pass the half guard, take the mount, pound them out from mount. And then if they turn their back, you get the back of your rear naked choke. You know, the real 2005 sort of era stuff. And Glover Teixeira, respect to him because he's retired now, but he was still so dangerous from the mount. And a lot of guys just aren't. It's more of a jiu-jitsu thing. In fact, even in jiu-jitsu, it wasn't that effective for quite a while until Gordon Ryan started really using it again and using the crossed wrist stuff, which is obviously irrelevant in MMA, or mostly irrelevant in MMA. But yeah, Jailton Almeida is a bit of a throwback in that regard. The stuff that does give me pause, and you know, very quickly, I was super hype on this guy, and then he had a load of fights that he won and finished, and people were like, well, why aren't you hype on him anymore? And I'm like, because I've seen exactly the same thing over and over again, and it's not because he's magic, it's not because he's just, like, fair enough, he's beating these guys, but it's not because he's unstoppable, it's because these guys are either stupid or not very good. Literally, not exaggerating, every single fight, he opens with the front kick to the face and then the shot. And his shot is down to both knees. He tries to lock his hands under the butt and then he has to try and finish it from there, which is not a super athletic shot. That's like a real jiu-jitsu-y shot, not a wrestling shot. And I've always felt like if he meets someone who disengages off the front kick even, not even someone who needs to be able to stop a great double, just don't, as soon as you see the front kick, step back. If you do that 3 or 4 times, he's just thrown 3 or 4 front kicks at air, lots of opportunities to counter, lots of energy wasted on his end. But more than that, what if he meets someone who can stop the double leg? And Rosenstruck did once, and then he did exactly the same. Like, he stopped the double leg and thought, well, that'll give him pause for thought. And then Jailton Almeida did exactly the same double leg again and got him over, which was like, was that the magic of Jailton Almeida, or was that Jairzinho Rosenstruck thinking that'll dissuade him from doing that again anytime soon? It's kind of like how Shlemenko used to catch people by spinning and missing and then immediately spinning again for the same thing. It's like you could hear them in their head going, well, he wouldn't be daft enough to try that. Get smashed over the back of the head by a spinning back fist or forearm or whatever. But Curtis Blades is about as good a wrestler as the heavyweight division has, except John Jones. But John Jones, Stipe Miocic, but everything around this has the caveat that those two aren't going to fight again. They both declared it to be a retirement fight. They were saying, like, Gordon Ryan leaked it. It's like, no, everyone has known this is going to be a retirement fight. That's why they keep going on about legacy, because they've got no other reasonable way to justify John Jones beating up this retired old man who hasn't wanted to fight for 3 years. But aside from John Jones, strongest wrestler in the division, probably Curtis Blades, really good technical guy. If Jailton Almeida shot a double on him, an obvious telegraph double, if he did that, I can imagine Curtis Blades being able to feed him a single, get him off the double leg, deal with it in ways that other heavyweights haven't. I feel at heavyweight there's still a lot of like sprawl, dig the underhooks, sprawl, dig the underhooks. Whereas I think someone like Curtis Blades, or even someone like a Ryan Bader, a bit more nuanced in their ability. They'll feed you the single and they'll go, okay, you finish that single leg then, mate. What's that? Do you normally lock your hands and just run through the dude? Okay. Sorry, we're not doing that today. Now, Jailton Almeida, he has hit a couple of takedown trips from the clinch. You know, he hit one in his Contender Series debut, which is someone pissily posted at me like, he does other stuff, but it's so heavily weighted towards this double leg that isn't really, I mean, it's just him being a big, strong lad and getting the hands locked. And then having good enough grappling and heavyweights generally being so shitty that he can finish them on the ground from that. Anyone who survives that first round takes him into the second, takes him into the third. That's intriguing. You know, Derrick Lewis, pretty good at getting up. However, exposes his back to do so. And that's where this is kind of interesting, because Jailton Almeida is a 205-pound man, or 245-pound man, I suppose, now, who, when you turn your back, he hops on to backpack you, as opposed to tries to hold you around the waist and trip you back down, which I feel is where Derrick Lewis does a lot of his most successful stuff. It's people going, oh, God, got to get him back down. Obviously, Lewis has been submitted by a lot of people. His jiu-jitsu doesn't work stuff is really intriguing because he's got a really good armpit post escape, the Marcelo Garcia stuff. He has a powerful bridge. He turns to his knees really well, but he does show his back a lot. And he also gasses out super hard. You know, I think this is an interesting one because Derrick Lewis, the last few times, he's been like, I'm getting into jogging. I'm going to have cardio now. And he's tricked people into thinking that he's going to be good, and then he hasn't been. This time, he just got caught doing 136 miles an hour in a 50 mile an hour zone, bowling for children in his Lamborghini. And I think that's a sign that he's actually taking this fight seriously. To be like Pat Miletich, take a fight at 50 years old, 2 weeks after you got caught drunk driving. So the intrigue of this is Derrick Lewis is a big, strong boy, and he can get up off his back against a lot of people. It's not as intriguing as Curtis Blades, who can actually wrestle. Jailton Almeida's striking has been pretty bad. The portions of his fights that I've seen on the feet, I have just been like, you know, with most heavyweights, there's an air of danger there because they're big dudes and they can hit really hard. With Jailton Almeida, it just feels like watching, I don't know, two welterweights where neither of them's a big banger. They're just sort of throwing the punches out there awkwardly, chins up in the air, throwing the odd low kick. So I expect him to win this. I'm just not expecting to be blown away by it, and I wouldn't be at all surprised if the moment his front kick touches Derrick Lewis's guard, Derrick Lewis loads up the uppercut and just takes his head off. Because he's got such an obvious tell on when he's going to try his double leg. Also, Derrick Lewis, like I mentioned with Ngannou, cuts to make the upper limit. Big dude. Even if some of that's fat. Big dude. I think people undervalue like weight, certainly at heavyweight. People were going like, oh, it's, you know, don't make fun of Stipe Miocic for coming in at 234 when Ngannou weighed in at 277 for his boxing match the other night. Don't make fun of Stipe. He was trying to be light and lean and blah, blah, blah. It's like, you know, there's no point being lean. You need weight to move weight. You know, ask any fucking powerlifter. You need weight to hold people down. You need weight to lean on people. You need weight so they can't just move you around easily. So that's an intrigue because Jailton Almeida has made light heavyweight many, many times, and he has just sort of made himself a heavyweight by heavyweight being bad. You know, he was the only cruiserweight in the UFC. He was going back and forth for a bit. So he's giving up a few pounds to Derrick Lewis. Other stuff on this card, Gabriel Bonfim is on a great run. He just guillotined Trevin Giles. He guillotined Munir Lazez. Von Fluder guy on the Contender Series. Looks all right. I mean, both Bonfims, basically what they do is they aggressively crowd you, always lead with a slappy left hook, right straight left hook, and then they get a takedown. Or you try and take them down and they guillotine you. It's worked better for Gabriel Bonfim than it has for Ismail Bonfim, but that's because he's in a worse division, probably. He's fighting Nicholas Dalby, who's been pretty grindy in his last three. Yeah, that's all right. Rodrigo Nascimento versus Dontel Mays. How is that so high on the card? Caio Borralho versus Abus Magomedov. At least that's an interesting fight. Abus Magomedov has a skill that is really interesting. Super good kicker. Great front kicks to the body. Lovely high kicks, can turn one into the other, which would be really interesting if he didn't gas in 4 minutes. And he did that in PFL, and he did it against Sean Strickland. Embarrassing for a professional athlete who was headlining a UFC card even to be that poorly conditioned. Caio Borralho does the sort of floaty Machida style karate stuff out in the open, likes to really limit how much happens, and he's a good fun grappler. They get the fight nerds, they used to have Melky Galvao and his team come down and train with them. So they got Mika Galvao, Fabricio Andre, Diego Reyes. That team's sort of split up now because of, have a look at the allegations that have been made against Melky Galvao, because they're insane. Allegations, as I say, not confirmed. But anyway, it'll be fun. Caio Borralho occasionally hits a giggler sweep, so he's my boy. Speaking of jiu-jitsu, Rodolfo Vieira's back. He's going to fight Armin Petrosian. Armin Petrosian, basically a kickboxer. Rodolfo Vieira, basically just a grappler. Actually, I didn't think he looked bad when he got stuck striking with that guy for his whole last fight. Didn't think he looked that bad against Chris Curtis, who's a very good striker for that division. Anything else good? Ismail Bonfim versus Vink Pichel. Apparently Vink Pichel works most of the year as a janitor and then has the holidays to train, someone was saying. But yeah, obviously hasn't fought an awful... He's been in the UFC forever, but he takes like one fight a year. But he's on a decent run before he met Mark Madsen back in 2022. He was on a 3-fight winning streak. Roosevelt Roberts. Jim Miller, obviously, still a legit name to have on your record in 2020. Austin Hubbard, who is my boy. Actually was booked to fight Benoit Saint-Denis earlier this year, which is crazy. But yeah, no easy fights for this guy. I'd say Benoit Saint-Denis and Ismail Bonfim are tougher matchups than Mark Madsen, who he just lost to. Zelensky is fighting Rinat Fakhretdinov, who just smoked Kevin Lee in, under a minute, and had that fight with Brian Battle. Zelensky was a hot shit for a little while. He was on a great run at welterweight. Actually, probably one of the really great runs at welterweight. I mean, he beat from 2016 to 2019, he beat Omari Akhmedov, Keita Nakamura, Lyman Good, Max Griffin, Sean Strickland by knockout, Luigi Vendramini, and Curtis Millender. Now, you recognise a lot of those names. Good fights, finished a few of them, always entertaining. Met the Leech, and it suddenly came out that he knew nothing about boxing. Had that fight with Benoit Saint-Denis in 2021, which was crazy because obviously Benoit Saint-Denis came up at short notice, came up a weight class, and just got murked. And he just beat Abubakar Nurmagomedov, the bad Nurmagomedov. So he's going from a ridiculous Russian to a sublime Russian. I don't think Rinat Fakhretdinov is Dagestani, is he? I think he trains out of Moscow. Daniel Marcos, I see his picture on almost every card versus Victor Hugo, but not the Victor Hugo that I like from the grappling world. And that's about it. Mark Jacquezi's on the first fight of the night. He's going to try and boringly wrestle a guy in front of an away crowd, which will be very interesting. But yeah, it's an okay card. There'll be plenty to write about after it, I think. Just not too much to get excited for before the fights. I think Borralho versus Magomedov is probably my most interesting one there because, as much as I rag on Abus, he does have some skills that are interesting, and I would like to see how much of it is an adrenaline dump. He had a couple of bad gassing performances in PFL, but he could have worked to amend that, and it wouldn't have really helped if he had a massive adrenaline dump in his UFC headliner. Meanwhile, Caio Borralho is on a really good run. I mean, he hasn't lost since his second pro fight. Finished Alex Sejuk in his last one. The criticism has been that he's had some boring-ass fights because he likes to limit the action on the feet. And by limit the action on the feet, I don't mean like he smothers people in the clinch. I mean like he just bounces around in a long karate stance at range sometimes. And then the Bonfim brothers are always good, so that'll be good too. Anyway, I'm going to be back on Sunday writing about whatever happened. That one will be for the boys. As most of my post-fight breakdowns are, I just felt particularly magnanimous with my Ngannou one. If you want to sign up to the Patreon, get in on the extra stuff, sign up to the Patreon, support the podcast. If you want to send an email to the podcast, jackslackpodcast@gmail.com. And if you want to see what I'm writing anytime, fightprimer.com. Go read the Francis Ngannou or How Francis Ngannou Killed the King. And I'll catch you next time. I'm your boy Jack Slack. Was heavyweight boxing ever good? Bless.